Metcalf, David Wright, Janice Allred, Margaret Toscano, Tom Murphy, Judith Freeman, and many others on a long and growing list. But today, we each have 15 minutes to convey 10 years of transformation, the losing of our former lives and the finding of ourselves. 15 minutes to express a decade of metamorphosis, originally created by 15 minutes of fame that changed our lives forever one day in September 1993. How does one digest the evolution from Mormonism to a new worldview? This is a transition that never quits. Andy Warhol said we'd be famous for 15 minutes, but it never seems to end. My 15 minutes of fame seems to be turning into 15 years. From the Associated Press coverage of Women in Authority in January 1993 to Vogue magazine in June 2003. In between, it's been constant print and TV interviews. New York and LA Times, Time magazine, ABC Nightline, CBS, PBS, CNN, A&E, EIEIO, Reuters, on and on. Something about this journey is momentous enough to keep the media continually interested in us with little or no effort on our part. Contrary to rumor, I did not seek media attention. I have no agent, no website, no press kit, no media rep, no church PR department. I spend most of my time working on community projects or promoting other people's work. So why? Why me? Why us? Why are we in the spotlight losing our religion? I think because the story is simple, obvious. The drastic transition from Latter-day Saint to apostate heretic. It's kind of formulaic, really. Feminist in a patriarchal religion gets excommunication. It's kind of a no-brainer. I am a human soundbite. But I think the Mormon heretic story is worth discussing, especially because it cannot be discussed in the church. So by default, Mormon conflicts are mediated by the media. And I appreciate the option that they give us for self-reflection. Looking back, do I have any regrets about excommunication? No, and yes. I don't regret excommunication in spite of its endless cost to my life, my family, my livelihood. The cost has been more than I ever expected or would have guessed. I regret the loss, the fear, criticism, embarrassment, exclusion, pain, guilt, but I don't regret leaving the church. Given who I was, there was no place to go but out. Mormonism was limiting to me, so I needed to test the limits of Mormonism to see who I and the church really might be. And I discovered that I was more than Mormonism, and that God is far bigger than one church. Excommunication opened the door to a larger cosmos, inside and outside myself. I do regret the negative stigma of excommunication, tainting my reputation and affecting my book. It wasn't fair to the book or its contributors to lend them a heretic status by association. The book was not unorthodox. It was just too much, too soon. I can remain outside the church, but I really wish they would reinstate the book. People keep asking me, what have you been doing? So I thought I would cover a little bit of that territory at the risk of sounding like I'm giving a vita. Mostly I've been healing and suffering and learning. As a feminist researcher and writer in Mormon studies, doubt and writer's poverty are often your constant companion. But I haven't quit. I've continued to co-author and author 5 more small books, none of them controversial, on local themes, and have a few others in progress. I've continued writing and speaking on women's issues in Mormonism and religion. I co-taught a course at the University of Utah on women in Mormon culture for 7 years with Bella Evans. And I've been publishing articles and essays in a variety of publications, from the LA Times and Boston Globe, Network Magazine, Salt Lake Tribune, Salt Lake Observer, Salt Lake Magazine, Sunstone Dialogue, and the United Religions Initiative newsletter, among other publications. One outgrowth of my book was Mormon Feminist Networking, which has continued to be a love of mine. And in 1998, the Mormon Feminist Network became an internet organization with email lists and an emerging website. Along with that, I've been pushing this little idea of Moonstone, an organization for spirituality studies and feminist work, and that seems to be becoming a reality. My own personal mysticism always led me to explore other faiths from the time I was young. First the Catholic Church, then the Methodist, then the Episcopalian, where I tasted my first alcohol in the 6th grade. To other traditions, pagan, shamanic, Kabbalistic. My love for the diverse variety of faiths has eventually led me to join interfaith groups. In the year 2000, I became involved in the United Religions Initiative in San Francisco and also joined the Interfaith Roundtable for the 2002 Olympic Winter Games. We continue today as the Salt Lake Interfaith Roundtable, and where I serve as media chair, using my vast media experience, and we sponsor an annual interfaith service held in the LDS Tabernacle. I also serve on a few local boards, Utah Issues, Utah Pro-Choice Coalition, and the Wasatch Gnostic Society. However, the most difficult and rewarding work in the last 10 years has been my personal journey and my spiritual search. So what have I learned along the way? I wanted to share a few insights. The first task was simply surviving as a scapegoat. This is a challenge because a scapegoat is one who is wrong or guilty at the time when it is the most dangerous to be so. This can destroy your reputation, and it often does. So I had to constantly define my own role and image as a heretic rather than be defined by the church as an apostate. I had to somehow own the power of the rejected one and speak from that place without internalizing the invalidation. Obviously, this is tricky. Along the way, I developed 10 habits of highly successful heretics, which I don't have time to enumerate, but maybe I'll publish a pamphlet and it'll become an international bestseller. I think the most heartening thing, to be honest with you, was not so much being thanked or congratulated or interviewed or being defended, but having someone simply ignore my heretic status and treat me like I was completely normal. That was nice. Another important transition for me along the way was finding community. Looking back, I would have to say that out of all the really good advice I got, the very best advice came from Larry Miller, Larry Miller's mother, who's a good friend of mine. And she warned me right after my excommunication, Maxine, you have to find a community. You can't stay on your own alone. And it made no sense to me at the time because I prefer being on my own. My strength was always my ability to stand alone. So belonging was a foreign concept to me, and it was a lot harder to do. But I believed Laril because I respect her. So I visited a variety of churches trying to find one that worked. I liked the Unity Faith and the Episcopalians, the Unitarians and the Quakers, but mainly I just wanted a place where I could finally be ordained. It was pretty simple. That was my sort of acid test. The Restoration Church offered me an apostleship, but that was a little extreme. A deacon was more my speed. I did find a temporary home for 2 years with the Sunday Gathering Group, which many of you remember, an independent congregation of post-Mormons who formed in 1993 to support Lavina and the September 6th. We held a testimonial service once a month for 2 years, which I co-ministered along with Louise Dane, Marty Jones, Ardeen Watts, Paul Swenson, and several others. It was short-lived but blissful. The last service was held on Sunstone Weekend in August 1995. Then in 1996, I discovered that my spiritual path specifically coincided with archetypal patterns and an initiation path in Gnostic tradition. This synchronicity repeatedly manifested in dreams, visions, intuition, and my reading. I continually rediscovered myself in a variety of Gnostic manifestations, from Hermeticism to Kabbalah, to the Nag Hammadi, to Sophia and the wisdom literature, to the heretics and the mystics, even the Masons and the Mormons, to modern Gnostics and beyond. I began attending Gnostic Mass in 1997 and was baptized in 1998, then ordained to lesser clergy in 1999, where I now serve with, or continue to serve since then, with 2 male priests, both former Mormons themselves, and we celebrate a Gnostic Mass on Sundays in the Holy Cross Chapel. Leaving Mormonism. This was the hardest transition, I think, learning how to leave Mormonism. How do you really leave the one true Church of Jesus Christ? the restoration of original Christianity, the fullness of the gospel. How do you find yourself outside of Mormonism? I found myself straddling two worlds, one Mormon and one completely outside the Mormon worldview. The first was a Mormon paradigm. The second was a larger cosmic worldview. I had a paradigm shift from the one true church to all true churches, all faiths being true, each one revealing an aspect of God, a divine truth unique to that faith. I saw that only when you value them all do you begin to comprehend the consciousness of God. To know all of God, one must know God in the all. So I went from the Alpha Church with power and authority over all others to the Omega Church, which comprehends its place in relation to all. I went from the one above all others to the one among all others, from privilege and position to belonging, from exclusivity to inclusivity. In doing this, I found that I needed both paradigms in order to find myself. I couldn't disown the former, the Mormon paradigm, and I couldn't live without the latter, the larger cosmic paradigm. Even though the former seemed smaller and the latter was larger, the two worked together as integral partners, microcosmic and macrocosmic. I existed in both simultaneously, discovering two versions of myself, shifting upward and downward, working on two levels simultaneously to transcend the smaller paradigm with its lesser version of myself and access the larger paradigm and the larger cosmic self. I found that I'm a citizen of both the Mormon and the cosmic worldviews. I am a living paradox. My favorite map of the cosmos is the Kabbalah, which is a Jewish Gnostic paradigm. In that paradigm, I find everything from atheism to Gnosticism, Jesus Christ, Elohim, Jehovah, materialism, Mormonism, sunstone and moonstone, the all-seeing eyes, nothingness, and the all. I found Kabbalah itself at BYU, of all places, 20 years ago, and began a long study of its mystic truths. What's interesting is that 20 years later, last Thursday, in fact, I participated in a feminist seminar at BYU. So my transition might not be so drastic after all. Perhaps it's more like a reversal. I've come full circle from being a kind of Gnostic Mormon to being a kind of Mormon Gnostic. I think that this shift to a larger consciousness is healthy, not only for me, but it might do the church some good too. I can see the church moving somewhat in that direction with the doctrine of inclusion presented in the year 2001, and with its increasing interfaith collaboration due to the Olympics. The doctrine of inclusion, in case you haven't heard or don't remember, was based on the 11th Article of Faith, and it urges mutual respect for differences, tolerance one for another, regardless of doctrines and philosophies which we may espouse. It discourages negative judgment or imposing personal beliefs on others and exclusion of others for their beliefs. Of course, this doctrine refers to people of other faiths. It might be nice if it were applied to people in our own faith, like feminists and scholars and homosexuals. So, but I think that this doctrine could heal the church both within and without if the church continues to take it to its logical conclusion. Two more points. Belonging. I think the crucial task for me was finding belonging. And in doing that, I had to move beyond the role of the rejected one, especially the rejected woman. At some point, you have to cease not being and start being. You have to leave your non-status and finally become something. You have to move from not having to having, from being disempowered to being empowered. This was difficult for me to do after 4 decades of non-status in Mormonism. Not being was a way of life for me. So first I had to fulfill the heretic role and then take it to its conclusion. And then I had to transcend it or move beyond it. This was only possible by finding priests who would accept me and work with me, grant me pure status, and offer me belonging. This is why ordination was so important to me. I needed, for my own health, to finally shift out of that rejected status and into acceptance, to learn how to move in rhythm and get into harmony with men and work with them in new ways. It's not the end. Nothing is ever the be-all, end-all. Even when you have the priesthood, you still have to work out gender issues with men. But this one shift has been the most healing for me in the last 10 years. I think it's important to move into that place of being, because you can't stay in the role of the rejected one forever. You can't stay in a negative place too long. It can't remain the basis of your life. You need a positive role that has life-giving energy. A really important part of this for me was working with women in ministry of other faiths who are spiritually empowered and not waiting to receive permission from their fellows, but actually living as ministers of God. My association with other female clergy in the Quaker, Episcopal, Unitarian, Christian Science, Baha'i, and other faiths has been incredibly healing for me. These are my role models. These women show me how to be alive in God. In 1999, several of us collaborated to create the Utah Women in Ministry, which I participate in. Finally, the return. The most profound and unexpected transition of all in the last 10 years is what I would call the return. If it was strange or hard to leave Mormonism, it's even stranger to return to it after all that I've experienced and who I've become. But I have found myself returning to Mormonism in many ways. Joseph Campbell said that you can't truly understand your own tradition until you leave it and then return to view it from the outside. The return is a re-embracing of what was lost, but coming from a new place of wholeness. It's like coming back to Mormonism from a long, long journey as a new person or a new creature, more complete. When I was a member of the Mormon Church, I was always colliding with leaders. I was locked in conflict with them. Leaving released me from that enmeshment. Moving outside of Mormonism dissolved my former relationship with the church's leaders and allowed me to see them as human beings. Now I can see how much they're dealing with and how much they are struggling with in their own lives and with their own tremendous responsibilities. Now I can accept the church and its leaders for who they are and actually appreciate them. I no longer need to fight them or resist them. Where before I felt at odds with them, now I have compassion, empathy. And I find myself working with the church in all kinds of new ways. Where am I today? I'm happy. I think for the first time in my life. I feel healed and at peace. I feel great compassion for others, especially Orthodox Mormons and LDS church leaders. I see God at work in all of us. I love people. Some of my favorite people are conservative LDS men. And I mean that sincerely. Some of my greatest healing in the last 5 years has been with conservative LDS men. I understand my life now, even the awful parts. And I recognize my own damage, my limits, my post-traumatic stress levels, and my inability to cope at times. I see my own shadow, my anger and frustration, and I've learned how to deal with it better, I hope. Like the larger cosmos containing all faiths, I am someone who contains many parts, all negative or positive, the whole. To be honest, most of my anger is gone, and I like who I'm becoming. I trust a higher wisdom and a pattern to it all, and I can see that God is making something better of me. Thank you.